So you would love to move abroad, but your family made the silly choice of having been in America for a long time. What are your options? For most people, there actually are quite a few options. This list is not going to be an exhaustive list of everything you could possibly imagine, but I think some people will be quite surprised. As a disclaimer, luck is always going to be a factor in these things. There are certain disabilities that will disqualify you from visas for most countries. Age will a lot of the times disqualify you from visa to certain countries. You're gonna really have to do your research. Every country has lists of visas that are vastly different from one country to another. One type of visa that seems to be in common across many countries is a student visa. That, again, you have to be a student. You have to be able to afford to go to school to be able to do that, right? There are countries, though, that are desperate for immigrants. There are countries that are begging for people that are qualified, that hold jobs, that are under a certain age to move to those countries because they have an aging population, for example. You want to colonize somewhere? Go colonize the coloners. Go to Portugal. I saw that in a video the other day and I was dying. Please keep in mind, if you do want to immigrate to another country, that there are countries where the indigenous peoples of that country are begging Westerners not to move there because they are destroying local ecosystems, local economies. Please do your research and figure out whether or not you being there is going to harm the local population. If you move to, again, Portugal, we're going to use it as an example because I fucking love Portugal, okay? It's gorgeous. I love that country. If I didn't have connections to other countries in Europe, I would 100% go try and get to Portugal because it's so great. So that's why I'm using them. They want people there. They are trying to actively recruit people. There are special visas they have that are much easier to get than a visa to many other types of countries. Sometimes the visas will be job dependent. There are some countries that if you have some sort of nomad remote work job you can do, they will gladly take you. They will gladly take you because they're trying to increase their younger population. In Canada, there's a program for remote areas. Type in remote work visa Canada into Google. And if you're willing to live in one of these small towns that has these jobs that they're desperately trying to recruit pretty much anybody to fill that role, anyone who qualifies even slightly, they'll do the training for you in some of the cases. That's also an option that would be a lot more accessible. There are, of course, visas that are oh, you were just born a millionaire and you have just money flowing out of your ears. Of course, we'll accept you. A lot of countries have visas for those people, but most of us do not qualify under those circumstances. To move to France, my first visa I did was a student visa. I then went back home and reapplied pretty much immediately for a TAPIF visa, so TAPIF. And that is a visa where you get to go to France and teach English. That was awesome. I got to go into the high schools and the middle schools there. That was a great option for a visa because a lot of the expenses were reduced. If you speak English as a native speaker, there are quite a few countries that have English teaching type visas that you can do. You have to know they exist. You have to know they exist to be able to Google them. Definitely an awesome option for many people. TAPIF, you did have to be underneath a certain age. There were a bunch of qualifications. I happened to have pre-qualified for all of the things they were looking for. There's also the option of falling in love with a foreigner, but that is not as easy as it sounds, depending on the country. For example, it was much easier for me with my family, with my 2 children who qualify for American citizenship and my husband who is French and who does not qualify for citizenship. It was easier to move all of them over to Canada, a country where I have citizenship but I had not previously lived, than it was for us to move them back to the United States where I had grown up all the way up until I was an adult. It was financially much cheaper to move to Canada. And it was also just so much easier paperwork-wise. It was just going to be much less of a nightmare. I have had friends who have no children, but they've been married for 10, 15 years, who try to move over to the US with their spouse, and they're American citizens, right? And their spouse is not. And it is incredibly difficult. One couple, they had to be physically separated for 5 years while they were trying to prove to the US government that while she was in the US, she had a salary that would enable, it's a mess. The US's immigration system is incredibly discriminatory. It is a mess and it is just a bit of a nightmare. So just really look into it, Google it, definitely check to make sure if you do have even like grandparents or great grandparents that immigrated to the US, the puppy needs my attention. That you don't qualify for citizenship in that country, always double check that. But yeah, hopefully that helps. There are many other options I did not list here.